Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have potentially one of the most intimidating reviews I have ever done on my channel. This is absolutely frightening for me. And the reason is that I think that this fragrance is quite possibly the greatest masculine fragrance of all time. And I have a huge amount of respect for this fragrance. I mean, this fragrance, it's almost like it has a soul of its own, like I'm sitting with another person while I wear this. And so today we are going to try to review one of the greatest fragrances of all time, in my opinion, the great Chanel Antaeus. Now, when you read copy on this fragrance, it's very interesting because you'll hear copy or advertisements say things like, Antaeus is strong and powerful and yet subtle. Or it'll say things like, this is a virile fragrance, but it's also vulnerable. And they talk about sort of the dichotomy of this scent, how there is one side over here and one side over there. And you know what? They're right. There is some truth to the yin and yang of this fragrance. It is two things at once that just should not be. Basically, on the one side, it is this unreal blend of dirty, animalic, 80s in a bottle, castoreum, animalic, challenging, funky, dirty, whatever you want to call it. And on the other side, you have this Chanel posh refinement. If you know vintage Chanels from the past, you know, if you know things like Cuir de Russie or Chanel No. 5 or No. 22 or, you know, all of these great Chanels from the past, you know that refinement in Chanel perfume that I'm talking about. And I will review all of those fragrances I just mentioned. I will review even Pour Monsieur, the very first Masculin by Chanel. Now, this came out in 1955, okay? Just to make a point about how different things were back then, this is the next Masculin fragrance that came out, Antaeus. This came out in 1981. This came out 26 years after Chanel Pour Monsieur. Basically, an entire generation was born and passed on to the next generation. All had to wear Chanel Pour Monsieur if they wanted to wear a masculine Chanel before Antaeus was released. Just think about the difference in thought process with something like what I'm talking about here. 26 years. And I want to talk a little bit about Antaeus through the years, actually, before we really hop into some thoughts that I have. I don't even know if I can really call this a review because I don't feel like I have the words to do this justice. I don't have the English vocabulary to do a proper review on Antaeus, but I'm going to tell you some things about Antaeus that I know. So number one, this bottle that I have right here, this is a 1980s bottle. This is a pre-1990s, and so if you look at the top of the cap, you'll realize a couple things. First of all, the 80s sprayer looks like this. It almost looks like Antaeus got so angry that it just ate through the sprayer, or it just corroded it over the years with this corrosive castoreum acid that just ate the sprayer. But the top basically looks like this. And if you'll notice something, this is 1980s. This is 1990s, okay? So 1990s looks like this. And one way you can tell a vintage bottle of Antaeus is by eau de toilette here at the very top, okay? So the eau de toilette is on the top, right? Above the Chanel. Now, if you look, and also the 80s version right here says spray, but if you look at the 2000s bottle, this is a 2000s bottle of Antaeus, still I think about a decade ago, they went to a black sprayer, okay? And the old Chanel products all had a silver sprayer. Like this is a vintage version of Egoiste. It used to be called Le Egoiste, and you'll see silver sprayer, right? The newer bottles of Egoiste, black sprayer, okay? So I think about a decade ago they went to a black sprayer, but you'll notice this is the early 2000s. I think this is like 2002, somewhere around there, this particular bottle of Antaeus. And you'll notice the top, look, it's black, okay? So you can instantly see the difference between I'm going to try to show you all three without dropping them. So this is the 80s cap. Look at the Chanel logo. This is the 90s cap, and that is the 2000s cap, okay? So if you take a look, they made the Chanel logo smaller in the 90s. Look, this is Pour Monsieur, but look, it's basically the same logo. See how they made it smaller? And look at the 80s logo. Again, I just want to show you this so you can compare. If you're trying to find a vintage bottle, this is very important stuff. So you may find one that says eau de toilette above the Chanel, but if you don't get the proper 80s version, it won't smell the same because there are differences in each one of these bottles. I can't go through the differences, honestly, on camera. I don't think I have the ability to. And most people would think, oh, I'm going to say that this is great and this is shite. No, I'm not going to say that at all. Actually, I equally love every single bottle of Antaeus that I have. Like, I have a true love, like a magnet, like an attraction to Antaeus. Every single bottle of Antaeus that I have is different, and I love every single one equally, like a man would love their children equally, right? So the 80s version does something a little bit different. The 90s version does something a little bit different, but there is a big changeover from the 80s to everything post 90s is more similar. So my 90s bottle is much more similar to my 2000s bottle, okay? So that's something I want to mention. Like, if you're someone that's like, hey, I'm going to get a vintage because I want the original smell of what Antaeus was like when it first came out between 80 and 1989, you have to get one of the 80s bottles that basically the top looks like this. Even if you get one with the silver sprayer with the eau de toilette on top, if you get one of the 90s bottles, it will be different from the 80s bottles. There was a reformulation, I think, that happened in 1990. And not to confuse things any further, but there was a sport flanker of Antaeus that came out in the 80s, the mid 80s, called Antaeus Sport Cologne. It's one of the most obscure Chanel releases of all time. I thought it only lasted a year or two and they canceled it. Apparently, there are Chanel Sport fragrance, Chanel Antaeus Sport Cologne fragrances from 1985 all the way up to the early 90s before they discontinued it. So this actually ran something like 5 or 6 years before they discontinued it. I do have a comparison video. I don't think it's a very good comparison video because it's very hard to talk about Antaeus, but I do have a comparison video between Antaeus Sport, which I did before I had this bottle. I did it off of a decant my brother Rich Mitch sent me, and Antaeus. And there are differences, right? They removed some things in Antaeus. In a nutshell, they basically removed things like the myrrh that made Antaeus very resinous, and they added some things that are not here. Like, for example, they added peppermint and stuff like that to Antaeus Sport. And but interestingly enough, they left the castoreum thick and heavy. And so it's like a really see-through version of Antaeus that you can just peer right into the heart and see the animalic heart. So I'm not going to touch any more on during this Antaeus review on Antaeus Sport, but just know there is a sport flanker of Antaeus, and it's one of my favorite. Actually, it is my favorite sport fragrance of all time. Very closely followed by things like Kouros Eau de Sport, which, you know, I guess we'll have to do in a different video, and also something like Boss Sport, which is, do I even have it here? Yes, I do. Boss Sport. So those 80s sport flankers were amazing, and my kind of sport fragrances were what was going on back in the 80s. I just love how they did it back then, but Antaeus Sport takes the cake. Okay, so enough about Antaeus through the years. God help me if I can get through this review. So before we start talking about Antaeus, the smell, I have to talk about the way it makes me feel, because some people mention very strong, powerful figures with Antaeus. Like, for example, they'll mention someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, or they'll mention someone like Darth Vader from Star Wars or something like that, right? And the bottle just screams old school, like Darth Vader. Imagine like the old school army uniforms. The Black Knights of the Hudson is what they used to call them. The cadets, right? In a row, lined up, attention to detail. And if you watched enough of my videos, you know that I am a Oakland / Los Angeles / Las Vegas Raiders fan for the NFL. And the reason I'm a Raider fan is twofold. Number one, whenever I was very young, I did a very careful assessment of all of the teams, and I took it very, very seriously. And my assessment was, I went off of the logos, and I went, which one is the coolest logo as a little kid, right? And there was no doubt, hands down, the Raiders logo with the shield and the I forget who the person was that Al Davis modeled the man after, but you know, the Raiders logo with that little bit of a smirk on his face, like he knows something, but he's a badass, hands down, was like, that just appealed to me. And the other reason was one of my very good friends who turned into like a lifelong friend who grew up next to me. Was a Raider fan. He lived on the same street that I did. We used to watch all the games together. It's a tradition that basically continues until this day, right? And so what ended up happening was is I turned into a Raider fan, but I consider myself an old school Raider fan, okay? And so when I say that, I think about the bad boy image of the Raiders, right? So imagine the owner, Al Davis, right? Fighting the NFL, or, imagine before he lost his mind, of course. Al Davis was feared, and he was feared and hated by many. But imagine the great John Madden saying things like, yeah, the Raiders are dirty. So what? What are you going to do about it? Right? That was the image. People like to mention, for example, they had a couple signs in their locker room. One of the famous ones, if you watch any of the NFL Films does some things on like the Super Bowl champions. If you watch the ones on the Raiders, you'll see they had a sign in their locker room when they won those 3 Super Bowls, and it said 2 rules. Rule number 1, cheating is encouraged. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. And if you're not a Raider fan, you're probably like rolling your eyes right now, like, Jesus Christ, get on with it. But the point to me is that this idea of a rebel, an outlaw, is kind of what the Raiders stood for. They went against the grain. They were their own, Al Davis fought the NFL in court and won. It was that kind of thing, right? The whole league was against him, and he won. That idea of us against the world, me against the world. And then, of course, the figures. They allowed the players to be individuals. They didn't force them to fall into line. They didn't break their spirit. They didn't treat them like a stallion and they had to break their spirit. They allowed rebels and outlaws with nicknames like Snake, Dr. Death, the Assassin, who literally paralyzed somebody, the Mad Stork, the Man from Mars, Ghost, the Twos. I mean, these were like they were almost like characters out of a book, but they were obviously like heroes to people who grew up back then. For me, the reason I bring all this up is for one reason, and that when John Gruden was the coach of the Raiders, he let it slip that Al Davis had a signature scent. And what an absolutely perfect signature scent for the man, except for Antaeus. And then that's exactly what it was. And players said that you could literally smell him when he was in the building. They said he wore this weird cologne that whenever he was in the building, they knew he was in the building because they could smell Antaeus. And Antaeus is such a perfect Raider scent. I basically wear it on a lot of Raider game days. Like today, the Raiders actually do play. But the reason I go into all of that is because to me, this isn't Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator or Darth Vader or anything like that. But this is Al Davis. This is like that kind of a man, an icon who's willing to go his own way. So what does it smell like? Okay. So like I said, different versions smell different. I'm wearing the 1980s version today as my scent of the day. Let me just show you guys a fresh spray. Look at this. First of all, I don't know if you can see, but when you spray modern Antaeus, it's clear. Can you see that juice? It almost looks like, and I know it's been in the bottle for a while, but can you see the color on my skin? You can kind of get a feel right here where it's dripping down. It's like it comes out of the nozzle almost like brownish. Oh my God. Oh fuck. So the vintage version of Antaeus basically starts with this spicy castoreum note that almost smells purple in nature. Now, the newer versions are going to smell more aromatic from the beginning, okay? You will get much more bergamot, and there's more going on than just castoreum that hits you from the very beginning. There are some things like, there's a trio of citruses, which you get more in the newer versions, to be fair. And some people like that, okay? The vintage smells like a gooey purple when you first spray it. That's basically what it smells like. It smells like a spicy, gooey purple. That's the only way I can describe it. There's no other way to describe it. But the newer versions, you're going to get more spiciness from the coriander. You're going to get more citruses, okay? And you're going to get a clearer interpretation of the rose right out of the gate. The older bottle, you're going to get a lot more of that resinous myrrh, which makes it have that gooey Some say licorice-like feel. I don't think it has a licorice-like feel. I've heard myrrh described as fungal. Maybe you could sort of make that case. I could see fungal here because this is a very earthy fragrance. But really, when you think about the color purple, many people associate that with iris. That's the very first thing that sort of comes to mind. Here, it's not iris though, okay? I want you to imagine a gooey purple that almost feels as sticky as like a, if you've ever heard me describe labdanum, I once got actual labdanum, and if you put your fingers on it and closed it, it was like you super glued your fingers together. It was that sticky, right? And so just imagine this spicy, gooey purple smell on a leather chypre base with that metallic, animalic, sour castoreum punching you in the face from the very beginning, right? And it screams bold, masculine. And in 2023, if you wear something like this, it basically makes a bigger point about your personality, I think, than anything you could say. This says, I don't follow trends. I blaze my own path, right? I don't go through the path that's already cut in the forest. I make my own. That's what it says. I go against the grain. And if you know me, you know I am somebody who absolutely has to be going against the grain. But what happens is Antaeus is so much more than just castoreum. Everyone talks about the castoreum in this, and rightly so. It is 100% one of my favorite castoreum fragrances of all time. I also recently reviewed, in a Vintage Hall of Fame video, Balenciaga's Portos. That is another fragrance that, if you're like a lover of castoreum and you want to get an idea of some of the greatest castoreum fragrances of all time, well, I've now reviewed two of them, basically, because Portos is the other one that has this very sort of, the castoreum in Portos smells like you stuck your hands under your arms or like in between your legs, right? Like right in between your legs where your leg turns into your crotch, that little spot right there. And then you just sniffed them like the girl in Superstar, the movie. She's like, right? Just imagine that. That's what you're doing. That's the castoreum in Portos. Castoreum the castoreum in Antaeus does have a little bit of that sweaty feel, but it is a little bit classier. I think Antaeus is classy. It's that dichotomy, like I said in the beginning, of the animalic side and the classy side of Chanel. And Jacques Polge and François Demachy just merged those two worlds beautifully. I mean, I couldn't say enough about them. There is, the sweatiness is there, the sour sweatiness, but it's also classiness, right? And what's interesting is that fresh, herbal, spicy, sort of green opening, somehow they did that without making it camphor-like smell. There's no camphor smell in here. It's sort of a clear, slightly sweet, but I think the sweetness comes more from the resins, but it's like a clear, fresh, liquidy, sort of green, aromatic bit, okay? That's how I would describe it. And extremely classy. So just imagine, here's how I would describe the castoreum. So, if you had a hero as a kid who played sports, like, you know, my generation was probably like Michael Jordan or Mike Tyson, or if you're maybe a little bit younger, Tom Brady, whoever it may be, whoever you had a hero. For me, it was, for basketball, it would have been like Dirk Nowitzki with the Mavs, and maybe like Mike Modano with the Dallas Stars, something like that, right? Just remember being a kid and looking up to someone. Imagine if you sat right in the front row, or right down the row when they exit the stadium, and you're this little kid, you're there with your dad, and the superstar who you basically see as like a god walks by, sees you cheering, takes his shirt off after the game because the game's over, and of course he won at the last second shot or whatever it is, and he gives it to you as a gift, right? Here's the jersey, he takes it off, he goes to the locker room, and it's still drenched with his sweat, right? Just imagine being a little kid and thinking about this. And then imagine going back to high school, and imagine if you played sports, and if you ever did this actually triggered a memory. I can't tell you how long, it's been forever since I thought about this, but imagine Did you ever like have early morning practice for whatever sport you played? So I played all kind of sports in high school, but basketball is the main one that I can think about, where we had a specific like practice shirt and shorts we were supposed to wear, and you were supposed to bring it home every week to have it washed, right? And so, but sometimes you would forget because you're a high school kid playing grab ass in the locker room, whatever you're doing, right? Talking about girls, and you leave it in your locker. So you've been sweating all morning, working out, and then you throw it in your locker along. You throw your shirt and your shorts in the locker. They're still drenched in your sweat, and a long weekend happens, and you forget about them. And of course, when you get home, your mother chews you out because she's like, how come you didn't bring them home? They're going to stink. You didn't wash them. So you get back to school next week, and what do you have to do? You have to wear them. But they've been sitting in your locker all weekend, the long weekend, Thanksgiving week, whatever it is. You get back and you have to wear them. And whenever you put them on, there is this stale, dank sweatiness to them, right? This musky, dank testosterone, think about just teenage age testosterone dankness. That's just absolutely imprinted into the fabric of this shirt and short combo. And it's stale and it's sour, okay? That is the castoreum in Antaeus. So you say, okay, remember, this is Antaeus though. So it's not just some disgusting, dirty, funky, like something that you would smell and it's like, oh my God, get that away from me. No, there's something actually, there's something so posh about this, right? It's almost like you want that funky smell. Have you ever driven by like a skunk or something that has been hit by a car and everyone else is like, ugh, oh my God. And you're like, actually, I think I kind of like that smell. That's how I would describe not the skunk smell, but the feeling of, actually, I think I like that smell. And so think about it, because the best way I can describe one half of the opening, because remember, this is the dichotomy fragrance, right? We have one on each side. There is a chasm that runs through the middle of this fragrance. And so remember, this is Antaeus. So who is Antaeus? So Antaeus is a Greek demigod, half son of Poseidon and Gaia, okay? And he drew his strength from the earth. And so in Greek, Antaeus basically means opponent, right? And Teo literally means like I face, or I oppose is basically what it means in Greek. And so remember what I said about Al Davis earlier. Fragrance for a man who literally is willing to stand against the world on his own. The world and one man standing on the other side. Antaeus literally stood against the world as he guarded the garden of Hesperides, where Hercules was supposed to find this golden apple that belonged to Zeus. Antaeus was undefeated. He was basically invincible as long as he remained in contact with his Mother Earth. So Hercules had to kind of hold Antaeus in this clutching embrace. And in order to defeat him, he had to lift him up and pick him up above the ground is basically what he had to do in order to defeat him. So just imagine, an embrace literally killed him. And so what's interesting is if you look at the advertisements that Chanel used, and I'm going to put it as the thumbnail for this video, right? So you'll see it. The man holding the giant Antaeus bottle. And it almost makes no sense if you don't understand the Greek theology backstory behind it. So that giant bottle of Antaeus that man is sort of picking up, holding over his head, is just like Hercules held up Antaeus so he couldn't draw his strength from the earth, right? See, the thing about Antaeus as a perfume is that it's supposed to be, like I said, two parts. So it's supposed to be strong, like a god, but gentle, like a man, is again one of the copies that I saw. And so just like Antaeus drew its strength from the earth, this fragrance is very heavy in its base, okay? So what's interesting is if you look at some of the notes, leather, castoreum, myrrh, beeswax, patchouli, oak moss, labdanum, right? So just like Antaeus drew his strength from the earth, the part of Antaeus that makes this a sort of talked about powerhouse, I would say, by many. This is easily thrown into the animalic powerhouse category from the 80s, is the bass notes. So you get the funky castoreum that just has that masculine pheromone smell like I talked about earlier. And in the vintage, what you will notice is, for example, the 80s version that I'm wearing today, that resinous myrrh sort of labdanum note, the sticky labdanum in the fungal like myrrh, they just sort of get turned up and they give it that sort of gooey aspect. And the more modern versions, they don't have that sort of dark stickiness like the 80s version has. So just kind of like the sports star that I was mentioning earlier that left everything on the floor, the rink, whatever you will, just gave it his all, and then gave the jersey to the kid on his way to the locker room. His story doesn't end there. He goes to the locker room. You would expect him to shower. Let's say he doesn't. Let's say he just changes directly into a tuxedo. And on that tuxedo, there's a rose that is pinned to his lapel or paper clipped in, or whatever, however you would put a rose on your jacket without screwing it up. And so there's a rose pinned on his chest. And that is the other side of Antaeus. This man just sweated on the basketball court for 3.5 hours, left his blood, sweat, and tears on the court, won the game. He's the hero. He gives the jersey to the kid who is just sitting there obviously in awe. And on the other side, he goes to the locker room, decides he's not going to shower because his sweat smells good, and just puts the tuxedo on. Everyone that sees him sees the classy side. They see the aromatic green freshness, kind of a throwback. If you think about some of the herbs and green touches in Antaeus, it is a little bit of a throwback to a classier time. There are little, even vintage touches for this and for 1980. If you think about some of the things that are in here, like for example, in Pour Monsieur, there is lemon, there is basil, there is, if you look up Antaeus, there is basil as well, there is lemon, and there's that clary sage, which I think adds a little bit of that sweaty profile to it. The clary sage kind of works in tandem with the castoreum to give it a little bit of that sweaty touch. But this green freshness that you will find in Antaeus, and again, it's more evident in the newer bottles, right? But the green freshness is definitely sort of this throwback to a classier time. And that classy vibe is pretty prominent. And don't forget, so Antaeus lived when connected with the earth, right? Jacques Polge and François Demachy, they didn't forget that. They didn't forget that it was the earth that gave Antaeus his strength in mythology. And so what's interesting is that they sort of gave it the aromatic and spicy parts, but they added the earthy element to Antaeus. And so there's this earthiness that sort of adds, to me, the earthiness in Antaeus adds this, oh God, it adds this element of intrigue. You know what I mean? Like, it adds this element of intrigue, and the rose adds this dark, mysterious side, right? There's this like mysterious rose that starts to come forward because, and I've said this before, the rose in this fragrance enters the fragrance like I would imagine a pirate ship entering out of the fog. Like someone's sitting on a ship, there's nothing around, and all of a sudden there's like a pirate ship right in front of you because it was foggy and it's just there. And all of a sudden there's just this shock. You know what I mean? The rose lumbers into this fragrance. Like I would imagine sort of Antaeus fighting Hercules, almost like sumo style. Like every time you see them drawn in mythology, they all have their shirts off, they're cut, right? Like they've been working out for years just to get ready for that particular battle. And I just imagine two sumo wrestlers just like boom, 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 right? Walking up to each other, getting ready for the fight. I mean, the rose just lumbers into this scent. And it stomps its way into the scent is really what it does. But I it leaves the fragrance with this debonair like confidence, if you will. There is something that's just impossible to resist in Antaeus. Remember, it's a Chanel. Never forget that. Even though everyone talks about Antaeus being this big animalic beast, and on one side it is. Remember, Antaeus was a giant. He was a demigod. But on the other side, there is a good side to Antaeus as well. If you know the whole story, you know that he sort of ends as a good guy, if you will. But so just imagine this rose pinned. Let's go back to your sports star, if you will. Imagine the rose pinned to the lapel of the perfectly fitted tuxedo on your favorite sports star who just won the game. Antaeus has it all. It has the aromatic freshness. It has the earthy chypre tones, which, remember, chypre basically came from the island of Cyprus in who was the god of love? It was Aphrodite. Was it Aphrodite? Aphrodite is famous. Speaking of mythology, yes, Aphrodite. She was the Greek goddess of sexual love and beauty. But she was famous for sleeping on a bed of mosses. And that's where the name chypre comes from. And so there's the earthiness of the chypre aspect in here. There's the leatheriness, which, by the way, this is a proper leather chypre. I have to say that right now. In my opinion, this is a proper leather chypre, but it is one of the classiest leather chypres. Just imagine like Leonardo DiCaprio in a tuxedo in The Great Gatsby, right? Walking down the stairs. It's that vibe. There is the animalic castoreum side, and that's one of my favorite parts of it. But there's all of these different parts. There's this noble rose. There's this slightly indolic jasmine that maybe even more than slightly indolic. Maybe the indolic jasmine adds more to this scent than I actually give it credit for. And then finally, there's this ghost hint of 2 notes, which kind of come and go into the scent. They weave their way in and out, like the ghost ship entering sort of the fog and then coming into the scene and then leaving, right? And it's crazy because they trick your nose. Sometimes you're thinking like, are they there? Are they not there? Am I smelling it? Am I not smelling it? Those 2 notes are, one is honey. So this honey/beeswax combo, whatever you want to call it. Beeswax is supposedly a little bit more animalic than a proper just honey note, from my understanding. But there is this 80s beeswax. Remember, honey was a big thing in the 80s. Remember Hugo Boss from 1985. And I reviewed Pacoma's Gatsby. That's a beautiful honey. I will review on the channel this little bad boy right here. Whoops. Yep, here it is. MCM Success. A beautiful honey. Oh, God. So remember, honey was a big thing in the 80s. Kouros had honey. So, but the way they used it in here, it almost just like weaves in and out. And the other note that is almost like a ghost note. It's not a ghost note. It's not fair to call it a ghost note because I think it definitely is a note in here, is this smokiness. And it's this sort of like wisps of incense just sort of coming in and out, weaving its way in and out, right? And so these ghost notes just kind of come back. Like once you think they're gone and defeated, just like Antaeus was defeated by Hercules, he comes back actually later on in Dante's Inferno. He comes back where after being defeated by Hercules and killed, his story is not over. So unlike his other brother giants who are one of them, I can't remember which one. One of them can't speak. He was basically removed from understanding language or something. I think that was the giant who supposedly built the Tower of Babel, and he was being punished for that. The other one was chained up for waging war against the gods or something like that. And then finally, Antaeus is left unchanged. It's almost like a bit of a redemption story, if you will. And he ends up carrying them in the palm of his hand. And so he was at home, literally at home, inside Mother Earth. He was in hell, in the center of the earth, Antaeus was comfortable and at home. And this is a fragrance for such a man. It's a fragrance for a man of power. It's a fragrance that doesn't mind if he's in the fires, if the heat is turned up on him. He's comfortable in those situations. This is a fragrance that doesn't need to yell and scream and make others belittle others to make himself feel good. That's not the kind of man who would wear this. To me, this is almost the opposite. This is like a classy man who maybe even is a little soft-spoken, but when a line gets crossed, he's uncontrollable. He's ferocious because he has specific rules that he lives by. He knows who he is. He knows what he stands for. He also knows that if you don't stand for something, that you'll fall for anything. This man is assertive. He commands a room just by his presence. Antaeus is literally a giant among other perfumes. Sorry for number 22 to do this, but this is how I see Antaeus versus all the other perfumes. Antaeus is literally a giant, towers over other fragrances. Number 22 is a great fragrance. No offense to number 22, but that is literally how I see Antaeus in the world of fragrances for me. I ranked this as my favorite fragrance of all time previously. I put this as my, if you actually go watch some of my or if you pull up my channel on like a computer, the header, one of my friends, Vlad, actually made the, well, here, I'll show you. This was the picture that was behind me early on in my channel, right? This is actually a hand-drawn or a hand-carved. I got this at a Starving Artists convention. It's actually really cool. But where you can see God obviously almost touches man. It almost looks like man doesn't care God touches him, right? It's like he's just like, hey, whatever. And God is trying to touch me. He's so close, but just not quite, right? And he put Antaeus right here in the middle, as if Antaeus was the bottle that was trying to be touched. A brilliant creation. And so I just say all of that to say that Antaeus is a fragrance that really moves me. You know, this is more than just a fragrance. That's why I considered this more than just a review. And I don't think I did it justice. I don't think it's possible for an Antaeus review to have justice done for it. It's impossible. There are no words anyone can say on YouTube that can describe something like Antaeus, Boss Number One, Kouros, Shalimar. Those type of fragrances for me are beyond any words that one could describe, because they speak to me, like they speak to my soul. Emotion. They change my emotions just by wearing them. And so I've been wearing Antaeus for the last couple of days, but obviously I've been wearing Antaeus for years and years and years. And for me, this is a timeless fragrance. It's a fragrance that I feel like a man could wear today. I feel like in 1981, obviously, or in, 2181, a man could be wearing this and still smell exactly all of the properties that a man should be. Not what's happening in society nowadays where, everything is sort of unisex and all this stuff. No, this actually highlights the properties of a true man, in my opinion. And that's why I love it so much. It may not speak to you the way it speaks to me, but I think Antaeus is the greatest masculine fragrance of all time. For me, like if I could pick one right now, it would be Antaeus. Now, Bel Ami has something to say about that, all right? And they go back and forth. Bel Ami is like Hercules and Antaeus is Antaeus. Well, Antaeus is Antaeus. And they fight each other. And they go back and forth. And sometimes in my story, Antaeus wins. But I will say that try to get yourself a sample. If you've never smelled Antaeus, if you're into vintage fragrances, if you are curious about them, there's almost no better place to start than here, in my opinion. So I hope you enjoyed the review. 40 minutes of me rambling about something. I hope you at least took something out of this. I did try to make this fragrance review from the heart, a little different than what I usually do. I didn't focus as much on the notes, but I hope I at least gave you a good breakdown in the way that it makes me feel. So do let me know what you think about Antaeus. Let me know what you think about the review. I hope you enjoyed learning about the different versions of Antaeus that are out there, and there's a bunch of them. So leave a comment. Love the interaction with you guys. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting me, having such a blast. And I mean, all the subscribers that we've accumulated so far. Over 6,000 subscribers now is more than I ever could have imagined at just a couple years into the journey, especially with someone like me that doesn't do graphics and all this crazy stuff. And so I just love the back and forth with everyone. And so leave a comment. Thanks for watching. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.